Okay, and welcome back. This is the XAML Controls session in the Developer's Guide to Windows 10.
Yeah.
I'm Andy Wigley, and with me is Shen Chauhan.
Hey everyone.
Right, just a couple of questions. We'll tackle a couple of questions first, so we got from our first session. So we've had a question saying, I'm a complete beginner. How do I get started developing UWP apps? And I'm really interested. So we are working on a complete beginners video series. So we're going to be shipping that before too long, so that will be aimed at people who are real, totally want to get started right from the first principles. Yeah, clearly we're kind of, these talks we're doing here, we're sort of really expecting you to have some little bit app development experience and some experience of C# and probably Visual Studio. So,
XAML,
yeah. So I apologise if it's lots going over your head, but I hope you're just getting excited about the sort of possibilities of things you can build. And then we got some tutorials coming along very soon that are going to be aimed at complete beginners. Also a question about the Xbox. Yeah, so that's coming. So with this first 10.240 is all about shipping the first public release of the platform for desktop and convertibles. We're obviously still working on you've seen me do mobile emulators, so I've used the mobile emulators, and if you are in the Windows Insiders program, you can get builds for your real physical phones right now as well. But we haven't actually shipped the kind of, we're still working on the shell, still working on that sort of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, and another question, are we expecting developer guide videos for each release of the Windows SDK? I expect so.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I would think so.
Just more
That's kind of where we're at. So continuous revision.
Yeah.
Exchange log of each SDK release. Yeah, well, we're going to be preparing these videos, and then we're sort of we'll try and
probably have like a change. Like this is what's different.
Exactly, and some of the videos that Jerry and I recorded for the tech preview are still relevant to this release. So there's things like sharing, drag and drop, and the file storage and these kind of things. Those ones are still valid. Occasionally the tools might look a little bit out of date, but so we're going to continuously refresh this.
Yeah.
So another question, we're still a little confused. One binary, you said we still have to choose the device CPU type like you did. So that was just for debugging. So when you debug an app and you ship it out, if you're actually debugging, if you're running it on the desktop or on the phone emulator, it's an x86 because that's where it's running. Whereas the Raspberry Pi that was here and is now on the floor, not because we don't love it.
We've eaten it.
That's right. Is running an ARM processor. So a debug you have to select, but when you ship up to the store,
it's an AppX. So what we really should say is it's a single AppX that runs across multiple devices, and they themselves will have different CPU configurations. So you'll still have that 64, 86 when you deploy to the store.
So the build process takes care of creating those CPU specific.
Yeah, so
binaries,
you'll upload those binaries based on the CPU architecture. And essentially what we're really saying is it's just that single AppX. So if you had an x86, for instance, any CPU with x86 would be able to take that package regardless of the device. It doesn't have to be a desktop. It could be, if you get a phone that has x86, it'll deploy to that.
Yep. Indeed. Yes. We haven't got any at the moment, have we? No, they're all ARM at the moment, but who knows. Yeah, and we will be making the slide decks available. They'll all be up somewhere soon. So keep watching the channel line pages, and we'll direct you to those. They're not available right now, but we will get those up just as soon as we can. And we're going to talk about the store tomorrow.
It's tomorrow
in detail.
It's 3 p.m. PST.
Yeah, that's right. All right, let's move on to XAML Controls. Let's talk about this one for the next sort of 50 minutes or so. There are a bunch of XAML controls. So I was talking about the bridging technologies before, and we are, the interesting thing about the iOS bridge, for example, is that your Objective-C, you're actually writing your code just as if you were targeting the Apple controls, but we map them internally to the corresponding XAML controls, and we do that all transparently for you with this kind of interoperability layer. So when it runs on our platform, they're native controls, and with XAML controls, all these bridging technologies are there to help you if our technologies are not your favoured short tools of the trade, but still, XAML and C# is probably, if you want the very best experience, this is still the way to go. So let's look at the controls in the XAML toolbox. First of all, it's important to realise, the controls we've got are adaptive, and I showed you a little bit about this in the first session with the pivot, and that's how that kind of runs across all these different devices, and it actually knows about the screen size and adjusts the layout automatically. And it's the same, you know, with things. Here's the menu bar and this sort of thing on the different kind of user experience that you get there from those different devices. So they adapt automatically, show different number of icons according to the amount of space that you've got. So that's one thing. The other thing is they do understand how you're interacting. So a list box like this, if you are using a mouse and keyboard, it has built into it the intelligence to adapt. So you will get these up and down arrow adornments that you can use for navigating if you're using a mouse. And if you're using a touch, then you'll notice that the spacing increases. So
yeah, I've noticed you get a bit more padding and margin around things. It's nice.
Easy touch targets, because you know what it's like with screens that, you know, the old finger end trying to the fingernail clicking on stuff. Yeah, we don't like that. So on the same there on the left, you know, we've got a menu that the spacing is increased when we're actually using touch. So all the standard controls, and there are lots of them, have all this kind of goodness built into them. So you want to sort of build your UI using these as your main tools of your trade. So using these standard controls gets you a long way. We're going to talk in the not the next session, the one after that, about adaptive UI and how you can actually use these controls and add your own design input into all this as well. So let's look, this is going to be a gazetteer of all of the controls. So some of them will dig a bit deeper into them, particularly going to concentrate on some of the newer ones like the relative panel, the split view and this kind of thing. So yeah, the windows, these are the layout controls. So the layout controls generally don't have any visual appearance.
No.
Border perhaps does. You might be able to paint the background, but what their job essentially is to act as a container for other controls. So you use these to lay things out. That's why they're called layout controls.
Yes.
Yeah. And you know, these are they. So just to run through, a canvas is the kind of I don't know. I've never used a canvas, to be honest. It's not widely used. It's kind of a draw anywhere surface.
It's very sort of like, yeah, you're pinpointing exactly where you want things. It doesn't relay things out, and it's pretty much you are in control of everything, which gets a bit difficult at times.
And it's probably fair to say, in a responsive layout kind of world, canvas is of limited utility because you are very discreetly positioning things at certain positions. So. It's
just too much overhead you'd have to manage.
Yeah,
we've got better controls that can help.
Yeah. Stack panel is useful though. You use this a lot. This is has two orientations, so you can have horizontal or vertical. Horizontal alignment. Oh no, hang on.
The orientation,
which is not shown on there.
Sorry,
So the default orientation is vertical. So here we've got a rectangle, an ellipse, and a polygon stacked vertically. So you can change the orientation to horizontal, and it would stack them horizontally. So it's very useful for laying things out. The relative panel is another way of doing this sort of thing. But sometimes, you know, stack panels.
This is just nice because you just put the children in and it just sorts itself
out. You could put margins on each of these to put spacing between them. You know, they don't have to be touching like.
It's more a stylistic thing at that point, I suppose.
Yeah. Now grid. This is your main tool of the trade, really. So this is the one that you're going to use the most. So here we've got what a grid is a table. It's a table layout tool. And it's your most valuable tool, really, for doing responsive layout. So there are a number of different ways of defining rows and columns. You don't have to define either. You could have a 0 row, 0 column grid, and that would be equivalent to a 1 by 1 table.
Basically.
Yeah, that's right. But normally, more often than that, you'd actually define some rows, and you can use it for laying things out relative to each other. Here we've got a rectangle, ellipse, and a polygon. And if you don't, you see these grid.row and grid.columns being mentioned there.
The attached properties.
These are called attached properties. So an attached property is actually not a property that is on the control itself. It's on its parent.
So it attaches it. Yeah, it's kind of.
Yeah. So what you're saying here is that rectangle, the blue rectangle, is in row 0, column 0 of its containing grid, and the polygon is in row 1, grid, column 1, which is why you can see that green things out there.
And I'm assuming if you don't put any of these in, they all just go straight to the top left and they go on top of one another and they just don't do any layout.
Yeah, that's exactly. So controls will just sit on top of each other unless you tell them anything else.
Yeah, don't forget that.
That's right. And this is really great because it's really important to have a proportional layout. So here we've got an example of 3 columns. So we've got 3 ways of defining the width of rows and columns. Star sizing is just a proportional layout. And then an auto sizing is I want to just to size this row just sufficient to contain the controls that you've placed in it.
You just ask the child saying, hey, how what's your
you
height
need?
and what's your width, and I'll give you whatever you ask
Exactly.
for.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So you'll typically have an arrangement like this where you might have an auto one where you stick some stuff in it like a header, and then you want to have the rest of the grid sort of proportionally laid out across the rest of the page, and something that will have 2/3 of the content will have this stuff in it, and then 1/3 will have this on it, and that will automatically adapt depending on whether you're on a smaller or a larger screen. And this is where these star columns and rows really come in useful. So the proportional layout thing, the star there is just a weighting. So you've got 2 star and 1 star. So you add them together, it means that that whole area is divided by 3. The left-hand column gets 2/3 of it. The middle one gets 1/3 of that space, and then the auto one is discretely sized according to what you put in.
Some people also use like sort of the decimal point. So I want 0.25, which essentially is like the whole I want to.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so whatever, however you want.
However you want to do it, as long as it's proportional itself, really, in some respects. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you can hard code size, you can pixel size things as well, and as it says there, avoid in most situations. Why would you want to do that? You can do that, but that again, as soon as you start hard coding sizes, that's usually the route to getting some problems and getting a nice responsive layout.
Yeah, it's one of those it works on my box sort of thing.
Yeah. And there's another example, but doing the same thing with rows. So you can get the kind of idea of this as to how this might shape up. Another example, here's a proportional layout with grid. Again, we've got an auto column at the top, which has got the header. You've got an auto row at the top, which has got your header. You've got an auto row at the bottom, which has probably got a stack panel in it or something, left and right. No, it's got another grid in it, which is divided 1 by 1, and then you've got left, presumably is left oriented in there in the first cell, and then the right text is right oriented in the bottom cell, and then the 1 star means just take up all the rest of the space. So this is a nice way of putting a header and a footer, and all the rest of your content, maybe it's a list view with items in it, goes in the middle. So there you go, you get a nice layout on different screen devices. Now I'm just going to show you a beautiful demo, not written by me, I'm afraid. Right, so this actually is one of the SDK samples, and on GitHub there are a bunch of Universal Windows Platform samples, the SDK samples on GitHub, and this is one of them. The app, it's a beautiful thing. So let's just switch to x86. We're going to run it on the local machine, and whatever I say in the next 45 minutes about controls, actually just go and have a look at this, because this is the way to find out. It's a beautiful looking demo. So here you go, all of the XAML controls and layout are all in here. So and we can go over to specific controls by name, or you can go and look at them by context. I'm going to have a look at the grid, which is the one we were just talking about. And here, we've got got an example of there's some XAML, which just drill into it so you can see that. So we've got a couple of 3 columns. One is there we've got a pixel size, which we said don't do, 50. We've got one that's auto, so it's sized according to its content, and then we have the other one where it's the default. If you don't say anything, that's star. And then we've got some rows as well, and we've got some stuff in there. So you can see that, and the output is this thing above. So we've got the red one moves around, so we can actually change the row. So now we've changed it to grid row equals 2, and this is grid row equals 1. It goes in the middle. We can change the column to be to column 1, and we can change the column to be column 2. So you can see how things move around relative to each other. So you can have a play with this, and you can see the XAML updating in real time. And this sample has got all of the controls in it. And we will return to this, you can be sure. So that's very nice. Now then. So that was a brief look at the layout with the grid, and a chance to show you that control. WrapGrid is another one. It just wraps content, so it will either go horizontally, and then when it runs out of space, it will wrap around, or it can do the same vertically. Quite kind of useful. I don't know. I've used one very much actually.
I've used it in the past quite a bit. It just depends on your scenario, I suppose. Yeah. Scroll view is very important. So if you've got some content, maybe you've got a star thing, and then you whack in there loads of content. Not a list view. So list controls have got that sort of scroll bars built into them. But if you've got a bunch of static content, you've got a stack panel with
some text blocks, and then an image, and then more stuff. And you want to be sure that people can scroll and see it all on whichever screen size, then it's a good idea to wrap it in a scroll viewer, because then they can scroll up and down or left to right and actually see anything that's not visible. And if the space is sufficient, then obviously you won't see the scroll bar, so it's intelligent control. Now, the new guy, this is the brand new one. So all those other ones have been around for 8.1, but this is the new chap.
It's one of my favorites.
It's a new XAML layout control, and it ranges children by declaring relationships between them. So that's real nice. So the kind of way you use this is you put, essentially, you need to think of your content as islands of content. And I showed in the first session with the Blue Yonder Airways, where we have different sort of panels where the content is. So you have these sort of bits of content, and then you arrange so that each of those blocks of content will itself be a layout control of some kind, a grid or another relative panel or a stack panel. And then you can actually, you kind of probably position the top left one, for example, and then you can arrange the others in relative to that position. So you can say, I want that to be right of that, and underneath that, and left of that, and right of this, and this sort of thing. So
essentially moving the parent moves everything else around with it.
That's right, yeah. Now where this becomes really valuable is that you can change those relationships in one of these visual states. So you can actually, this is where, as the screen size reduces, you can sort of move some content from over there on the right and put it underneath and this sort of thing. So you still, you can have a good layout that really works well in a responsive design. So really important tool.
It's definitely a lot easier using this than trying to arrange all the grid columns and rows when it's trying to be responsive. This is a lot easier, nicer.
So here's one example. We've got a relative panel which contains within it a rectangle, and the bit highlighted in yellow there is that they're attached properties again. So you're setting on that rectangle, you're saying, okay, I want to align my horizontal center with the panel.
So we're talking about the red one here.
Yeah, right? So that's right. So the red rectangle is aligned with the center of its container, which is the big blue square there. So it's gone center. And we're aligning the vertical center. So effectively what we're doing is just centering it.
Right in the middle.
Yep. Yeah. And then underneath we've got rectangle blue rect, which hasn't got any explicit positioning, so that just ends up top left.
Top left, okay.
And then, so there's a whole bunch of properties where you can align with the sibling, and then there's align with the panel, and then there's a whole bunch of other properties where you can align relative to other content. So here, the red rectangle, so first of all, we've got our blue rectangle is top left again.
Yeah.
Not exactly. Bit of artistic license there. There's a margin missing, I think. It's probably on that. So, and then the red rectangle is positioned relative to that light blue rectangle, the blue rectangle. So you can see there we are aligning below the blue rectangle, and we're aligning our horizontal center with the blue rectangle. So you can see the effect.
So it's directly beneath the blue rectangle, but in the middle of.
That's right. So that's nice. Now, where this really becomes useful is in an adaptive design. So I'm going to show a quick demo of that. So I'll leave that running because we're going to come back to that. But over here I've got another copy of Visual Studio. This is an adaptive list demo. I'll run it first and then I'll just talk you through how it works.
Okay.
So this is a list. Now a list is obviously a control that will allow you to show a load of children. So you bind it to a collection of items.
Yeah.
And here we've got an adaptive list, so you can resize the window. It says here to see columns getting dropped or added in the list. Oh. So as we resize it, you'll see there we've got the actual
see the name here.
Yeah, the name gets dropped underneath, and the time comes and goes. You see the 312 there disappears as well. So we've got this is an adaptive list. So this uses the relative panel to rearrange stuff and position that name, the artist name, which is currently right of the title. As we get narrower, becomes underneath the title, and also the time actually disappears altogether. So this is an example of an adaptive list.
So I'm assuming there's like an adaptive trigger there that then from there goes and changes the relative.
Let's have a look at how it works. Yeah, exactly that. So the way this works is, first of all, let's have a look at our main page. So this is our main layout. I'm not too interested in the designer view, but that'll come out in a minute in like 5%, a tiny little thumbnail. Oh no, it hasn't. There you go. Lied. 8-inch tablet. So, but here is my I've got a grid is in the outer, so every page must have a single
Yeah.
container control, a layout control as its, so it can only have, a page can only have sort of
One root,
root child element, and then inside that you put everything else. So inside that we've got a, literally pixel size row, not meant to do that, should have been auto really. And then the rest of the row is, the second row is everything else. And so text block text is, this guy is going into row 0. If you don't explicitly mention the row, that's where it goes in 0, 0. So
Understood,
that's the header, which is the adaptive list scenario bit. There's text up here. Is going on there. Let's shrink that down so we can actually see something. There we go. And underneath that we've got our list view, which is in grid row 1. So that's positioning everything underneath. It's bound, item source is binding to a collection of items, which is in the data for this, which we don't need to look at right now. This is the container for the items, but the important thing here is an item template is how in a list you define the layout for each and every item that it's going to show. So for whatever items there are in this collection, it's going to use this item template to lay out. And in fact, inside that you always have a data template, and inside that you might have a grid, stack panel or whatever, but in this case we've actually got this thing called a local item template control. So this is a user control. Now this is something that's new for you if you're not used to these adaptive triggers, which you won't be if you haven't built UWP before. If you want to use adaptive triggers inside a data template, you have to put that data template in a user control. So item template control, this is our user control. So this, I've got some design time data so you can see what's going on. And down here we're going to look at the tooling for how you build this actually in an upcoming session, in the adaptive UI session. But here we've got our controller, our main out container control is a relative panel. And inside here we've got some visual states. So we've got a narrow layout, which is for anything that is a window width of 1 or higher. And here we're using the relative panel right of, making sure that the artist name, this guy here, is right of the number text box, which is this guy here.
So the importance here is make sure that your UI elements have names on them. Otherwise, there's no way to do this.
No, that's right. That's right. The duration text box, which is this, is collapsed, disappears, and the artist text box, which is this guy again, is below the name. So it's actually right of the number and below the name. So this is why it appears under there. If we were in Blend, you could actually view this. I'm not going to bother now because we're going back to that in the adaptive UI session. But in Blend, you can see this, but you can't in Visual Studio. Then the wider layout, which applies once we get to 900 or above, actually there's absolutely nothing in there. So what we're saying is, okay, when you're on a widescreen, use the design layout. So that's it, actually, essentially. So we've applied adaptive triggers to this to create a nice adaptive UI using the relative panel to reposition stuff. All right, okay. The split view. So you're an expert on the split view. You want to tell us about the split view?
Yeah, so the split view, some of you probably know it as the hamburger control. The idea here is it allows you to have your navigation in a way that's sort of dynamic and adaptive, and it has various states, which you can see here. So you can see there's a couple of properties that are really important on the split view. There's the is pane open, and there's the display mode. So
the pane is the bit on the left.
The pane is the bit on the left. Yeah, so that's where most people put their navigation sort of things.
Tends to be navigation, but actually the control, when you create one out of, you type into the XAML split view and close it off. It doesn't have any visual appearance out of the box, does it?
No. So it's totally up to you to make sure that it's somehow your style and the way you like to do things. But out of the box, it's just a basic control that allows you to have the pane and the content, and then from there, we'll have a demo in a bit that shows you how to wire that all up and make sure that you get a rich experience. And again, based on your device and your screen size, you'll then make a decision as to whether you want the split view to sort of disappear and then you just have the control at the top to enable it, or whether you'll have it sort of in a compact mode, so it's a thin little bar, or if you've got a lot of real estate, then hey, you've got the option of just showing it by default. Yeah,
so this shows it nicely, doesn't it? So the display mode is inline, so the content is and the pane are side by side.
Correct.
overlay where the
pane
slides out and actually overlays the content,
Correct.
so the content still remains behind it. Compact inline.
Yeah, so that's where it's basically where it's sort of, you know, if you've got it true, then it'll be wide, but when it goes to false, it'll go to the thin, narrow strip as opposed to totally disappearing
Yeah,
off.
so that's the difference. So it's essentially the same as inline, but it's that you just
But it
keep
goes to
this,
the thin-
you keep this compact.
Yeah.
So you still got probably just have icons on that, so that
Correct.
the user will know that there's a command surface there. They might tap on it to extend it out.
Yeah.
And then obviously compact overlay is very like that.
It's very similar.
Okay, lots of cool stuff. Yeah. So at this point, we need to just
We need to do a
this
quick
over.
switch. All right, I just need the HDMI.
Okay,
Luke.
and you're going to show us an example of
yeah.
this. So the split view is probably going to be a big favourite for people. We think. Yeah.
So I recently wrote a blog post on this.
Shen's blog.
Chauhan.com. There you go, shameless plug.
Yeah.
So here we go. So here you can see we've got a very simple application, and as I resize it, you can see we're using visual states. But you can see that what I'm doing is I'm swapping between the various, you know, display modes and the pane open. And here I've got the hamburger, which you can click. So let me show you how we go about creating this very quickly.
Yeah.
So if I close that.
Because there's something actually quite interesting that you have to grasp with the split view, don't you? In that, if you think about a normal page,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and we're going to talk about this actually, I think, in the next session. So when you look at a page of an app, hidden around that is this thing you can't see called a frame.
Correct.
And a frame is the container for pages. And so in a normal app that's not using a split view, you tend to have one frame and a bunch of pages inside it.
And in this case, we're going to.
But in this case, you kind of
frame.
flip it, you invert it, don't you?
Yeah. So let's go through that, and I'll then show you the app running with the frame in.
Right.
So here we have the split view control. And you can see here by default, I normally put the display mode in line and true. This is normally for, as a developer, I just like to see it in the designer to make sure I can see what I'm doing. But actually my visual states, once they're put in, override that in anyway. Yeah, so that's fine. So you can see here, actually, I set the split view pane. And I've got a stack panel in there. And essentially, I use radio buttons. I just generally like the states that they have.
Yeah.
And in there, I have another stack panel showing the symbol icon.
Radio buttons are ideal for a navigation surface like that because you
Correct.
select one, it automatically deselects
the other one.
Yeah.
So I quite like that.
And you can just put the nice. They also nicely include an icon, symbol icon, and then the text. Yeah,
so that's
what you've done there.
That's what I've done here. So I actually override the style slightly on the radio button. So I remove sort of the check and I actually put in a symbol icon and a text.
So what you've done there, you've opened the radio button.
Yeah.
And there's the closing thing, and inside is the content. So you're totally overriding the standard push button appearance that you would see. Yeah.
Because I like the little icons.
Oh yeah.
It's just a nice little touch. And then the frame that we talked about. So this is the main frame. So notice that this is outside of the pane now. So this is in the content of the split view.
This is the content area.
Yeah. And just before we talk a bit more about that, I just want to show you the actual button itself. So some people like to use, you know, from character map, you can go to the MDL assets and grab the
MDL,
3 lines. So it's actually one of the fonts that we have, the Seago MDL too.
Yeah.
And you can go in there and pick the font out.
Seago, what is that? Modern design language?
Yeah.
Or some other M word that we're not allowed to use anymore? Yeah. Okay.
So I generally just use a stack panel with 3 rectangles just to show that you can actually use whatever you like. But this makes sense because people are used to it.
Yeah.
And then if I just quickly run this up again.
Oh yeah, because there is a MDL, there is a hamburger in the MDL, but you just drawn some rectangles.
Yeah, I struggle trying to find it all. It's fast for me to do the rectangles.
Well, whatever works.
So I click the map, and you can see the map actually loads in the middle.
Yeah.
So how did I do that? Well, actually, what I'm saying to the app is, when I click the map button, I actually want it to load inside this mainframe.
Yeah.
So you'll notice here that actually what I have on the map radio button is a click event handler. And I actually tag it as well with map. You can actually have different event handlers for different, buttons, but actually because of the way I like to do things, I've just thought tagging might be faster. And in essence, what happens here is when the click event fires, I just basically make sure it's a radio button, I check the tag, and if it is, then on the main frame, so this is the one inside the content of the split view, I call navigate.
So the frame that's within the split view now becomes the new container for your content pages, and you just treat it just the same as a frame of a a regular app, if you like.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So, and at that point, I just push in the map page, and I can pass in the usual, it's using the same navigation that you'd be used to on a
Cool.
UWP.
Yeah.
And then the final thing here is, so on the hamburger as well, where you see I've got the wrong one. Go to the hamburger as well. You can see on the button, I also have a couple of things here. So I set the width, and I set it to basically the compact pane length of the split view, because I don't want it to look too short, too wide.
Yeah.
And then I also have a click event handler on that as well, which is basically a very, very simple sort of, hey, if you're open, then close, and if you're closed, then open. So it just flips the view around. And that's pretty much it. It's pretty simple. So it's not...
Oh, that's nice. Yeah. I've seen on Twitter a lot of people struggling to know how to use this control, but once you explain it like this, it's not too complicated.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the source will be available as well, so
yep,
feel free to have a play. All right.
Awesome.
Thanks so much. I'll hand back over to you.
Right. We should leave that back in. Yeah, so there you go. That was a nice example of the split view, which I think with the relative panel is the major new controls that we've got.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just because it's there doesn't mean you have to use it, but it's there in case you do.
Indeed, yeah. Right, let's run through a whole bunch of others. We've got a load of buttons. Yeah, buttons are pretty boring, really. Actually, radio button should be there. It's not a button. Hyperlink button, repeat button, toggle button. There you go. There are buttons. Boring. Button is a button is a button.
Click it.
Yeah, and we've got a bunch of text controls as well. Text box, password box, text block, blah, blah, blah. Right, you can see them all there. Loads of ways of displaying stuff. And that sample I showed you before, has great examples of all of these. So go and get that from GitHub, Universal Windows Platform, the SDK samples, and there's that, and a whole bunch of other great new stuff as well. Loads and loads of samples in there. So I'm not going to talk about them because they're all kind of boring. Okay, so radio button turns up in here because it's a selection control, picker control. So here, there's a great example of the calendar view. That's a new one actually. So this is real nice, very rich control. It has all this nice colouring for showing selection and this sort of thing. This is actually, you can use this in your apps. It's exactly the same control that is used by our first-party apps.
Yes.
So you get all that goodness as well. And in fact, talking about our first-party apps, one good message for XAML-based developers today is that our first-party apps are built using exactly the same controls and same SDK that you are using, which wasn't necessarily the case with earlier versions. No. We had our own kind of tool set and stuff. We obviously try and produce the very best developer tools for people. But anyway, now we're totally eating our own dog food because the stuff we are shipping is using the same tools that you're using. So there's a bunch of selection and picker controls. These are collection data controls. We already kind of had a good look at list view and things, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Hub control, content control, and this sort of thing. So there's various ways of holding collections of data. The ones on the right there, the templates, these are the different ways of customizing headers and the content area and all this sort of thing. So there are different controls you can use as another container controls for collections. So there's a lot. Most of the time, you're going to use the data template and items panel template. Rarely do you change to anything else. We've got a question here. Was there any change in the list view control from Windows 8 to Windows 10? Well, we've done a lot of work on all of these. So, so if you'll find the question is Zev. Thanks for the question, Zev. You're saying it could not scroll both vertically and horizontally. Well, you can override the content. You can actually override the items panel template and turn it into a wrap panel and change the orientation. So,
well, if you want to scroll both ways, you could even just look at putting a scroll view around it, right?
Well, if you want to scroll both ways, you probably want to look at a grid view, don't you?
Yeah, or grid view.
Yeah. So there you go. So, So those are the collection data controls. Those are the containers, the different template bits for modifying the bits of the layout. Here's an example of the grid view syntax. So you can see there the grid view is the outer container, and inside that we've got our item template. And an item template contains a data template. So you kind of saw an example of this before, but with a list view, the grid view takes the same kind of pattern. So the data template, the stuff inside that, you can just have XAML controls directly in like that, and that defines the layout of every item in that collection, how it's going to show those items. The example I showed before, the adaptive list, was, as I said there, if you want the content, the item template to be adaptive, then you have to put that into a user control, and you can use adaptive triggers. Yeah. But that's an example of that. There we go. And then the list view, very, very simple. It's similar, you see. Here we're actually overriding the header, so you can change the header by using syntax like that, or you can just set header property, header equals some text up in the opening element, and then just uses the default rendering, or you can override the styling of the header in the way that's shown there, but just by doing that list view.header element. And then again, the item template has exactly the same data template inside it. Here's a flip view, great for doing like photo views and this sort of thing. Yeah. They're all basically the same pattern, data templates, and inside that you've got your content area definition.
Well, it's nice because once you've mastered it once, it's pretty easy to then just go and use the same sort of technique across everything.
So each of these collections, they're just slightly different ways of arranging its children, really. And here's the hub syntax, which we tend to use for these very media-rich kind of things with a huge, lovely background, like beaches of the world. Gosh, it would be nice to be there now, wouldn't it?
Maybe the next one.
Yeah. Well, should we do the next update from, I don't know, Thailand or something?
Yeah, that's good.
I think so. Yeah, we'll put that to our leaders. Yeah, I'm sure they'll go for it. Yeah, beaches of the world. So here we got. Now, one interesting thing about the hub control is that you divide this up into a number of different hub sections. So this example here, we've got a latest travel. We've got a header, which is beaches of the world. Then we've got a number of different hub sections, which is the latest travel news, the top beaches, and the top trips. So and each of those, each hub section, the content of it has to be in a data template. So that's one weirdness, if you like, with the hub control. But thereafter, you just define the content for each area, even though in general, it's only sort of a not a collection as such, a collection of objects. Yeah. Although inside that, you could have a list view as well. So, but the content has to be in a data template. So there you go. And again, if you want to make that, I did have a question on Twitter recently. If you want to make that a hub section adaptive, just the same rule applies. Make it a user control, and then you can use your adaptive triggers in there.
Yeah, just stick it all in.
Yeah. There you go. Yes, the latest travel news. We've got app bars and commands. Now these are interesting in the sense that the app bar, which used to be just the command bar on the bottom or the top of the page in 8.1, you can now basically put them anywhere. So it's just another container control, but for app bar buttons. And app bar buttons are very nice. They can use these new nice sort of empty icons, this Windows 10 style, so the styling has changed. We've got app bar buttons, app bar toggle buttons, and app bar separators, and you can create these nice little control strips very easily. And they can be, I assume you can have these vertically. I don't know.
Yeah,
I think so. There you go. So, and this is very nice for these kind of collections of buttons, nicely formatted.
There's a lot of them as well.
There are huge numbers of icons, yes, and you can create your own custom ones, of course, as well. The flyout controls, pop-up is open, content dialog. Flyout content dialog's interesting. This was a phone 8.1. Think of this as a rich message box, message dialog. So it's a pop-up control that you can put. It's not just the kind of message box.
It's not just text and a button.
Yeah,
it's
right.
a bit more. It's more richer.
Graphics on it and this sort of thing and this sort of thing. So here's an example showing on a phone, but it is used everywhere. Yeah. So it's a UWP control now. You can just put stuff in it. Supports both full and partial screen, so you can have it floating. Now, interestingly, if you do add new item on a UWP XAML project, one of the new item templates is a content dialog, and that's so you actually code it like a user control, so it becomes a separate XAML item in your project. And those tend to run full screen on a phone, and they'll still run as a floating window on desktop. But you can have them. You can define them in line, or you can define them in XAML. So you can actually do one purely. This is the content dialog. Add new items. Content dialog. You just design it as if it's a user control, and then in your code, when you want to show it, you just new up an instance of it. Call its show async method. Await it. And then you'll get back from that a content dialog result, so you can figure out whether the user pressed the primary or the secondary button. And you can just set that up, and it's nice and flexible. So at this point, I'm going to just dip back to our lovely sample from before. not that one. We've done with the adaptive list. And back here we go. So let's go back and let's go and have a look at our, let's go back. Oh, there's a content dialog. Let's have a content dialog. So this is the XAML for that. So here you can see the XAML's content dialog. It's got a title of sign in, primary button text. You can set secondary button text. You can set this in XAML or of course in code, or you can actually data bind. You can bind these to properties on a view model or something. You've got primary button click, so you can have a click event whenever somebody clicks one of those. And then underneath that we've got a stack panel, which is the content that we're actually going to show on that. And if we show the dialog, that's what it looks like.
There you go.
And you can see it's nice, a nice modal, and you saw actually there was a nice animation.
There was, yeah.
So it's actually a really nice way of having these nice modal windows floating over your content. Now, if we ran this on the phone, which you can, this is a UWP sample, it would come up to more full screen. Yeah.
And again, you can design these in Blend as well. You don't just need to be Visual Studio centric, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. In fact, Blend's the best place for visualizing this kind of thing. So yeah, it's nice, and so you can actually, there you go. And there's a bunch of other, like I said, this sample is beautiful. You have loads of examples of flyouts. You can, that's just a click to show flyout, so it just pops up. There's a button with a flyout. All items will be removed. So flyouts are a very nice way of having confirmation dialogues pop up very nicely. So real nice. And here you can see the examples, the XAML you'll need to do all of this sort of thing. App bar buttons. There we go. An app bar button with a font. There you go. An app bar button with a symbol. So keep playing with this. Download it. Masses of great content in this. I think that's probably enough for that.
Yeah.
Progress media and inking controls. Yeah, we've got them. Progress rings. That's the nice wait for a minute. We're doing something. Ink canvas. We're gonna look at this inking and all these other tools
later on, isn't it?
We're going to do one tomorrow if you're watching this in real time. The more personal computing session. So we've got lots of really cool stuff like that: speech and inking and Windows Hello, face recognition, all these real new cool ways of interacting with a computing device. The ink canvas is the way of allowing users to ink on stuff. They've got media elements and capture elements, so loads of great stuff for doing those kind of things. Now I want to wrap up this session by just talking a little bit about resources and styles, because this is obviously an important part of working, particularly with text kind of controls. So what is a XAML resource? So you have system resources, custom resources, control styles and templates. So system resources, system resources are supplied ones out of the box. There's actually not that many of them, to be honest.
No.
There's a bunch of them, but you can create your own custom resources, and there's a nice based on syntax. So you can say, I want to create a new style called migrate style, and it's based on a caption text block style, for example. And so it would inherit all the properties of that, and then you can override.
You're just overriding the bits that you want to change.
Specific font size or all this kind of thing. And you can create your own objects and brushes and this colors and this sort of thing. Control styles based on, and then you can actually re-template controls and this sort of thing. The resource scope, you tend to, whenever you create a new style, a new resource, you can give it a name, and then you can say, where do I want to define this? Do I want to define it at the application scope, in which case the definition gets put into your app.xaml? Or you can just put it in this document, which is
the page or whatever the type is.
Or you can create something called a resource dictionary, which is just a XAML file, which is a container for your custom styles. And when you're creating a new style, you can easily use this UI to do all that. So these are the style resources for text block. As you see, there are, if you look at that image, there's a base text block style, body text, caption, flyout picker, header, subtitle, title. That's it. So, but you can apply one of these styles, and then in addition you can say, set the font size to 24 and set it bold as well. So you can on a specific control, you can override whatever controls, whatever attributes are applied from the style, and you can create your own styles. You can use this based on, and in fact, all of the standard styles. If you look right at the bottom of this here, the header text block style. Maybe I should make that a bit bigger for people watching at home. if I can figure out how. Yeah, so you look at the bottom here. You've got style header, text block style, target type equals text block, based on a static resource of the base text block style. So that itself is based on a one that's included in the standard things. But what it does is it then overrides, sets the font size to 46, sets the font weight to light, and sets something called optical margin alignment to trim side bearings, whatever that means. I'm sure style gurus would be able to wax lyrically about the beauty of trim side bearings, but I'm afraid I don't know.
Sounds very James Bond-like.
It does. So yeah, you can see there, that's an example of one of the built-in styles. You can create your own ones that are just the same. What's happened to my screen? It's gone weird. Ooh.
Zoom out.
I'm trying to. Won't do it. Help! Got a slight technical gremlin here. I've got stuck in zoomed in and it won't go out.
Windows minus?
Yeah, that's right. That's what I'm doing.
Oh.
Let me just simply.
Oh, there you go.
Escape. I'd never do that. Here we go. You've learned some. I've learned something new today.
There you go.
If you're stuck in magnifier, escape is maybe a good thing to try. There you go. All right. So that's a bit on style. Now, here's one thing that I used to do. People who have seen me speak before will know that my background is all in phone. I used to do phone jump starts, and I've been on the journey through the years, and I love creating UIs on small devices. I still do, but I now love building them on all devices. But on Windows 8.1 phone, users can select a theme on the phone, which is light or dark. And that kind of changes the whole appearance of the UI of the phone to light or dark. And apps would automatically get that behavior. They would inherit it. So the problem with that might be is if you explicitly make your text foreground color to be white, and then the user chooses to set their phone theme to light, what happens is you get an invisible text. So it's another reason for using the style resource, the theme resources, because those that are theme aware, they know about this. But anyway, this problem has kind of gone away in Windows 10. We still have light or dark theme. So actually you can see here, this is a phone 10.
10, yes.
Preference, user preferences settings. You can still choose your mode, light or dark, and that changes the kind of built-in UI of the phone and the settings and the start screen and all this kind of stuff. But the apps don't get that automatically anymore. No. So, and there's also the other thing while we're talking about this thing is the user can choose an accent color, and that's kind of the color, the background of the start screen when you're in tablet mode, and the kind of highlight colors on transparent tiles. So the accent color kind of works through your whole experience on Windows 10. And both on desktop and on phone, you can choose your accent color. And if you want to color text in your app to that accent color, you can create yourself a solid color brush like that. Yeah. Give it a name. I don't know, accent brush is a good idea. And then set it to the color theme resource system accent color, and that will pick up whatever the user has selected. So you can use that. Now on Windows 10 mobile as well, you see on Windows 10 desktop there is no light or dark mode selection. No. Where there is on the phone, but in any case, your app does not automatically get that anymore. I'll talk about that in just a moment, but you can also, the users can also select, this is important though, users can select on all of these devices bigger text. If you're getting old like me and you can't see anymore, you need to make things a bit more readable. So the question here, and also high contrast, if you're visually impaired, you can turn off a lot of the graphics and make sure everything's really high contrast. You know, if you're an app developer, you should test your apps for these modes so that you make sure that you are supporting these users very well. Now just a bit back onto the light or dark mode. So you can actually set, it's now up to you as the app developer which mode you select for your app. And you might want to put it into you could put it in the user settings, so you can put in your app settings and allow the user to choose. But there's this requested theme equals dark or light. You can set it at the application level, and that's now inherited by all the pages in your app. Or you can set it on an individual page, or actually right down on any element.
It's on a control,
it's on a control, And now it's a requested theme rather than a actual do it. Yeah. Again, because of this, you know, users could select high contrast. So you could ask whatever you like. If the user selected high contrast, it's just going to get overridden. So that's that on that. We're done on that. Before we close, we've got a question. I'm just going to just try and answer this. So we've had a question that says, what is the best, thank you Faika, what is the best way to switch between wrap panel to stack panel as the item panel in a grid view using adaptive trigger? Well, so that's a good question, and I don't actually know the answer to that. So I imagine that the item panel itself, well, actually what you could do is simply, the blunt way of doing this would actually just be have 2 copies of your grid view in your XAML and use VSM to show or hide individual ones depending on where you are. That would be it's not a neat way of doing it,
no.
But that would certainly work. And if you use what we're going to talk about later, which is XDefer, to only load stuff up when it's needed, there isn't even a big performance.
Yeah, that's true, because the problem is if you have both of them on screen, you'll probably find you'll end up using resources from the system for both lists, even though you're only showing once. If you defer it, you'll only ever utilize whatever's on screen.
That's right, that's right. But that's a topic, that's a hint of what something is coming up this afternoon, yeah. All right, we're done with XAML controls. We're going to take a roughly 7-minute break.
Yeah.
Going to get a drink and stuff, and hope you will too. And you can join us for the next session, which is all about, well, it's all about the back button, really. It's actually a fascinating and interesting topic in UWP. You wouldn't think so, but actually providing back navigation and page navigation through your app is kind of interesting. Yeah. So we'll hopefully see you in just 6 or 7 minutes' time.
All right.